An ethnic group or ethnicity is a named social category of people who identify with each other on the basis of shared attributes that distinguish them from other groups, such as a common set of traditions, ancestry, language, or social treatment within their residing area. Ethnicity is sometimes used interchangeably with the term nation, particularly in the cases of ethnic nationalism, and is separate from but related to the concept of races. Ethnicity can be an inherited status or based on the society within which one lives. Membership of an ethnic group tends to be defined by a shared cultural heritage, ancestry, origin myth, history, homeland, symbolic systems such as religion, mythology, and ritual, cuisine, dressing, art, or physical appearance. Ethnic groups often continue to speak related languages and share a similar gene pool. On completion of this lesson, you should be able to define what is ethnic group and understand the evolution of ethnic group. Also, examine the modern thought on races, that is the ethnic groups, and understand the non-existence of the races, that is the clines. Ethnic groups of the population may be considered as minor subgroups of racial classification. Hereunder, we will discuss the concept of ethnic groups in brief. Ethnic group is a distinct category of the population in a large society whose culture is usually different from that of the society. The members of such a group are or feel themselves or are thought to be bound together by common ties of race or nationality or culture. In other words, a group of people having common racial, religious, linguistic, or national characteristic is known as an ethnic group. The cultural elements such as language, religion, belief, nationality, etc., which have been passed on from one generation to another are of paramount importance in the division of mankind. In fact, division of mankind can be most accurate and precise when based on ways of living and thinking. Culture has been defined as that complex whole which includes knowledge, language, belief, art, moral law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. A short and useful definition of the concept is: culture is the man-made part of the environment. There is a general agreement that culture is learned, that it allows a man to adapt himself to his natural and cultural setting, that it is greatly variable, that it is manifested in institutions, thought patterns, and material objects. Thus, a culture is the way of life of the people. It binds the people and helps in their socio-economic and political development. One of the most important elements that binds people together is language. Difference in language is an important barrier to interaction and communication between two groups. A person who speaks a different language is considered as an outsider and not one of us. Language is the medium through which ideas are transmitted, which helps in the development of cultural homogeneity. Different countries have different languages for diplomacy, government, and administration. Some countries have two or more than two official languages. The spatial distribution of languages is, however, very complex. Differences even of dialect are enough to divide people. In the Satluj Ganga plain, the Hindi heartland of India, there are variation of accent and speaking. A Brijwasi, who is basically between Mathura and Agra region, can be differentiated on the basis of accent from a Haryanvi, that is between Gurgaon and Rohtak. Though both these regions lie close to each other. In India, there are several dozen languages and several hundred colloquial languages which may be the basis of an ethnic or cultural group. Religion is another important factor that forms a basis of ethnic groups identification. Religious beliefs exercise a powerful influence on human communities. Religious beliefs are very deep seated, sometimes uniting people of different racial and language groups, often dividing people who are otherwise identical. The basic fact in religion is to be found in a belief in the existence of invisible powers that accompany man and intervene in all life's activities. The fundamental influence that religion exercises on human society is its demand for restraint on a kind different from that imposed by the physical environment. Religions prescribe prohibition and regulations. The worship of plants and animals is found mainly among the primitive people. In the relatively more developed societies like Indians, the banyan and peepal trees and cows and snakes etc. are worshipped. The Gujar Bakarwals of Kashmir, the Kyrgyz of Kyrgyzstan never felled a living tree. Similarly, the Buddhists of Ladakh never kill a living animal but use only the dead ones. The Eskimos of Canada and Greenland and the Yakuts and Chukchi of Siberia, who hunt the caribou and reindeer, go through a ceremony of atonement when they have completed a big hunting mission. During this ceremony, they do not kill a caribou or reindeer. Religion forbids Jews and Muslims to eat pork, and in consequence they do not keep pigs. Similarly, the Muslims are forbidden wine and they therefore grow the grapes mainly for the purpose of getting grapes into resins. Muslims do not lend an interest which in Muslim countries leaving banking to Greeks, Jews and Armenians. Among the Khasis of the Meghalaya and some of the tribes of Mizoram and Nagaland, taking milk and milk products is a taboo and they therefore do not go for cow milching and dairying. Among the Christians of Europe, fasting causes a great consumption of fish, and this has caused a remarkable growth of fishing in northwest Europe and its development into an important modern industry in country in which essential foods are supplied by agriculture and the rearing of cattle. The earliest religious beliefs were animistic, that is, they used to worship various spirits. These spirits are lodged within man or in the world outside, in forest, streams or mountains. The animist religion still persists in the tribal and isolated areas of the world. In India, Hinduism is the dominant religion. The social and moral framework of the Hindus is based on Hindu Varna or the caste and Upajati or the subcaste system. A Hindu caste includes only such person as may join in marriage and have meals together. This system was perhaps introduced in India by the Aryan conquerors for the purpose of preventing themselves from being absorbed by the native Dravidians. Buddhism developed as a reaction against Hinduism. It was willing to receive the unfortunate and the outcast and inspired mediation and a taste of solitary life. In Tibet and Xinjiang province of China, at least 1/4 of the men are monks vowed to celibacy, a moral restriction which deeply influences democracy and manpower. Buddhism is an important religion in South and East Asia. China has two other religions, Confucianism and Taoism. The teaching of Confucius are concerned with social relationships, welded out a more primitive systems of beliefs which include ancestor worship. Lao Tzu, a contemporary of Confucius, fastened on the spiritual and mystic elements in this primitive substratum religion known as Taoism. Japan has its own system of belief, Shinto, basically a primitive animistic religion given a deeper significance by the infusion of Buddhism in the 6th century AD. The three important monotheistic religions arose in the Southwest Asia, namely Judaism, Christianity and Islam. Judaism, which dates back to the Moses in the 13th century BC, is uncompromisingly monotheistic. After its clash with imperial Rome and the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 and 135, the Jews were expelled from the Holy Land and a Jewish state was not again established until 1948. Almost 2000 years after, although the majority of adherents of Judaism remain scattered throughout the world. The largest followers in the world are that of Christianity. The adherents of Christianity are found in all the major and sub-racial groups of the world. It was founded in the 1st century AD by Jesus of Nazareth, the Messiah or Anointed One, by his disciples who were then called Christians. Christianity spread quickly through the Roman Empire in Asia, Europe and Africa. In the 4th century AD, with the Pope of Rome, the successor of Saint Peter, Christ's chief disciple, widely recognized as the supreme authority in a rapidly emerging church hierarchy. The Eastern Church, which began in the Holy Land before there were any Christians in Rome, rejected papal authority in the 11th century AD, and the Eastern Orthodox Church, comprising Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria and Constantinople, the ancient Armenian, Jacobite, Syrian, Indian and Coptic, Ethiopian and Egyptian churches of the East. One of the most active proselytized faiths in the history of religion, Islam, was carried across Asia, Africa and the Mediterranean coastal lands of Europe, especially Spain, France, Vienna and East European region comprising of the Balkan states. Prophet Muhammad and the early caliphs were the great social innovators. Islam integrated the social tribal societies of the Southwest Asia and amalgamated the people of oasis cultivators, grain farmers, nomads, having animals for caravans, sailors on the Mediterranean Sea and Indian Ocean, urban merchants and craftsmen. Prophet Muhammad himself was a merchant before he became a prophet. Under Muslim law, the Christians and Jews have had the status of protected communities, also called as dhimmi, arising from the respect given to their teachings by the Prophet Muhammad himself. The separate status of these non-Muslims was reinforced by their economic functions. In most of the Ottoman Empire, Americans were bankers, while commerce was largely in the hands of Greeks. In Egypt, most of the government accountants and clerks were Copts. Islam affected the economic activities and patterns of settlements both in the rural and urban areas. In towns, cities and villages, the mosque used to be the nucleus around which the markets, sarais and residential areas were developed. Islam's prohibition of pork and wine discouraged the rearing of pigs and viticulture. So, as far as the spatial distribution of Muslims is concerned, the expansion of Islam was over land to the limits of dry lands in the northern Africa and Central Asia, and in some places into the adjoining humid regions. In Central Asia, its domain was mainly confined to Pamirs and along the Silk Road in China up to the Huanghe Basin, but it has also been propagated across the Indian Ocean by its maritime merchants. In the first half of the 20th century, while racial classification continued to be generated, a few anthropologists such as Ashley Montagu and biologists such as Julian Huxley opined that it was difficult to use zoological nomenclature for classifying humans into groups. They argued that the classification of human into races was simply not a productive endeavor to examine human variation. Montagu was probably the most vocal opponent of the use of the term race to classify humans. Following Huxley, Dinakar and Huxley and Haddon, Montagu adopted the term ethnic group as a replacement for race, maintaining that the later term has lost its usefulness for describing human variability. Subsequently, on July 18, 1950, following the World War II, UNESCO issued a statement which included both a scientific opposition to race theories and a moral condemnation of racism, and thus suggested to replace the term race as ethnic group. Livingstone, in his article on the non-existence of human races, pointed out that the static typological notion of races was simply not compatible with the dynamic concept of the natural selection. He did not deny the differences among population, but argued that these differences did not match races. As an alternative to this static approach, he suggested that research should focus on geographical variation on single traits, or what was called clinal variation. In other words, there are no races, there were only clines, or we call it as traits. If the goal of anthropological research was to explain the genetic variation among population, then the racial approach was simply not adequate. Montagu in 1962 insisted that race was an ambiguous, overused and very loaded term that should be dropped from the scientific literature, since it continued to mix biology, culture, intelligence, personality and nations together. Like Livingstone's, Montagu did not deny that there were differences between peoples. However, he argued that one should study a population's diversity, observe variation and then compare it to other population. Brace advocated for the study of individual traits, stating that races and even populations were not adequate for the study of human diversity. The distribution of individual traits and the selective pressures modified them should be focused. Thus, clines or the traits replaced races as the units of study for many anthropologists during the 1960s and 70s. Race is a biological consequence and as such explains practically nothing. The collective unit of evolution is the population, where all the forces of biological diversity such as mutation, natural selection, genetic drift and hybridization operate. The process of evolution may be very slow, but to a large extent depends on mutations where new genes are introduced into human populations. The evolutionary forces of mutation and selection go hand in hand, and the chances of survival of new mutant gene in the population will depend upon the kind of selective advantage it confers on its fertility rate. In spite of the elimination of a large number of mutant alleles, a considerable number of selected for by natural selection and over time become established in a population with an appreciable frequency, that is equal to 1%, leading to the condition of genetic polymorphism. In addition to mutation and selection, a force that substantially contributes to biological diversity in a population is genetic drift, a statistical process of pure chance devoid of any biological consideration. In a large population, changes in allele frequencies due to drift, that is sampling error, in gamete transmission are small from one generation to another, but the cumulative effect over many generations may be substantial. In the case of human populations derived from a smaller number of individuals, the drift may be extreme, resulting in the phenomena known as the founder effect. Because of sampling errors, the allele frequencies at various loci are likely to differ in the founders from these in the population from which they are derived. Thus, for example, if one of the founders of a new colony happened to carry an allele with a very low frequency in the parental population, the subsequent expansion of the colony will result in an disproportionately high frequency for that allele in the new population. Indeed, there are instances in human history where such extreme cases of genetic drift have occurred. A similar drift phenomena, but without migration, occurs when a population goes through bottleneck. Epidemics, wars, natural calamities and unfavorable climate, nutritional and morbidity condition may cause a population to be drastically reduced in number. The survivors reconstitute a new population, but random effects might have considerably altered its allelic frequency during the bottleneck and in the successive generations also. The possibility cannot be ruled out, as some of the allelic differences seen among the contemporary ethnic groups of human population are the result of such founder effects and bottlenecks from time to time. The present distribution of racial variations in man can be explained through hybridization, a process by which genes from one population may be brought into another population, thereby changing the frequency of alleles in the hybrid population. Hybridization is expressed as an admixture of genes from two parent population in a descent hybrid population. Two comparatively recent and most important human examples of hybrid, or we call it as mixed population, are the mulatto, a negro crossing white, mainly in South Africa and North America, and mestizo, an American Indian and white cross, mainly in the South America. Although it is not easy to divide the world population into clear-cut categories such as races, as the dividing lines between them are arbitrary, many anthropologists now consider race to be more social or mental construct than an objective biological fact. Nonetheless, the European scientists and physical anthropologists of the 17th and 18th centuries proposed various systems of racial classification based on observable traits such as skin color, hair color, type, body proportion and skull measurements, essentially codifying the perceived differences among broad geographic populations of humans. The traditional terms for these populations, the Caucasides, Mongoloid and Negroid, are now controversial in both technical and non-technical usage. Presently, the biological aspect of race is described not by observing physical features, but rather from characteristics such as blood groups and other genetic polymorphisms. Because of the nature of geographical variation in man, it has been stated that there are no races, but only clines or the traits. However, a well regarded definition of race is population differing in gene frequency, and clearly such populations exist. Indeed, on such a definition, practically every human breeding population is a race. The issue is whether taxonomic grouping within Homo sapiens is meaningful and helpful, or whether human groupings of any kind above the breeding population are arbitrary, if not artificial. Different approaches to understanding ethnicity have been used by different social scientists when trying to understand the nature of ethnicity as a factor in human life and society. Ethnicity is used as a matter of cultural identity of a group, often based on shared ancestry, language and cultural traditions, while race is applied as a taxonomic grouping based on physical or biological similarities within groups. Most countries today consist of different ethnic groups. Ideally, countries strive for pluralism, where people of all ethnicities and races remain distinct but have social equality. As an example, the United States is exceptionally diverse, with people representing groups from all over the globe, but lacking in the true pluralism. The same can be said of the ethnic diversity of the former Soviet Union, with its more than 100 ethnic groups, some having more than